Okie doke. Well, it's 12 o'clock on the dot, so we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Fundamentals of Fellowships webinar hosted by the Programs Department at the Archaeological Institute of America and co-sponsored by the AIA Student Affairs Interest Group. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a couple of days. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Katie Albert, and I am the Programs and Professional Services Coordinator here at the AIA. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Meredith Langlitz, the Director of Programs at the AIA, who will be monitoring the chat during today's webinar. Please feel free to share in the chat below where you're joining from today. We love to see where everyone is tuning in from. And you're all welcome to add questions in the Zoom Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom center of your Zoom window. We'll address these all later on in the webinar today. Oops, too far. Sorry. But now, to kick things off, I have the privilege of welcoming a very special guest joining us today. We have with us Dr. Kim Shelton, who is an associate professor at UC Berkeley and is also the AIA's Vice President for Research and Academic Affairs. Kim, would you like to say a few words to our audience today?
Thanks, Katie. I appreciate the invitation to be here, and I'm really excited about this webinar because I think that applying for fellowships and grants at any level is a bit of a mystery. I think that happens to all of us, and everyone is a little different, and it can feel very complicated. And so anything we can do to lessen that sense of mystery and complication, the better it is. So I think there will be lots of tips and not exactly inside information, but things that may seem more obvious to those who set up the fellowship application than to those who are completing it. And again, that doesn't make anyone, unusual. This is par for the course. Speaking for someone who has applied for more than I'd ever like to think of, and will continue to be applying for things, especially for field work, for the rest of my career. I also want to just say that the question and answer session is going to be great following the presentation and the information, because everyone will have questions, and be the person who asks that question, because everyone's going to be thinking the same thing, and that's great. And one reason that I'm glad to be here is that I actually served on the fellowships committee for a number of years, and so have seen it from the other side, read a huge number of applications for almost all of the fellowships that you might be applying to. And so I have a sense of, as a committee, the kinds of things that we hope to see, and things that make it easier for us to understand the application and to grant the fellowship. So I look forward to being able to provide any information that I might be able to from that side of things. And then I also just want to say that as the Vice President for Research and Academic Affairs for the next couple of years, I'm beginning an agenda, a goal that's I call fieldwork and families, and thinking more about research, archaeological research at every level, and including the responsibilities that each one of us has to whatever we define as family, right? It could be parents, it could be children, it could be pets, it could be whatever. And those are all important parts of our lives and things that we also have to take into consideration. And I have found it frustrating for years. And as a graduate student in an early career professor as well, that I could not apply for, say, childcare as one of the things that I needed to budget in order to do the research that I needed to do, especially if I was going to apply for something that was away, whether that be in the Mediterranean or even at a research institute somewhere else in the US. So that's something that we are going to be instituting, is the ability to budget an aspect, whatever you need for some kind of family provisions or childcare or something along those lines, we want people to be able to budget for that. We don't yet have it official, but that's something that's coming, and it'll be part of our committee's considerations this year. But it certainly hasn't been in the past. But I just wanted to also let folks know that, because I think that's important. So that's all I want to say for now. And I hope the webinar is super informative, and we're going to be here to answer questions. Thanks, Katie.
Oh, thank you, Kim. We really appreciate you being here today to share your insights with the rest of us. Thanks again. We also have a real treat today. We're joined by two previous AIA fellows. Let me introduce them to you. Firstly, we have with us today Dr. Tim Shea, who received the Olivia James Fellowship in 2018 when he was a PhD candidate at Duke University. And now he's an assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill. Tim, would you like to give us the quick elevator pitch about what you did for your fellowship? And if you have any, maybe share some general tips for those in the audience considering applying for either the Olivia James or for another fellowship offered by the AIA.
Sure, and thanks for including me in this webinar. I'm sure I'll learn a lot too. It's always good to kind of hear other people's experiences. When I received the Olivia James, I was pretty late in my graduate career. I actually finished and I've defended my dissertation in the middle of the year, which I don't think is normal or the norm, but that was the path that I took. I spent the year as the Olivia James Fellow in Greece, mostly looking at things in museums that had been published. Amanda's experience, I think, is going to be slightly different. I worked a lot with the American School of Classical Studies in the permitting process and getting study permits to see material in museums, not just in Athens, but in Boeotia and Evia too. And it was a wonderful experience. One thing I would suggest when you're kind of in the planning and application drafting stage is ask a previous winner. You could ask me if you want to email me. I'm easy to find on UNC's website. Ask previous winners if you can see their successful application. That's something that I did that if we're thinking about demystifying the process, seeing a successful application, even if it's nothing like yours, and the one that I looked at was nothing like my project, but I at least got to see, how do you frame an amorphous dissertation project that you're not quite sure exactly how its limits are and its full scope is? How do you pitch it to a general reader, and how do you come up with a conceivable plan and present that research plan to the people who are going to be reading your application? So it's really, really helpful. And the other thing is, at least in my plan and outline in my application, I was as detailed as I could be. I had museum numbers of things I wanted to see as best I could. I had, the dates that I wanted to go to specific places and museums. And I think that was really good advice to me as well. To be as detailed as possible, which is often very difficult when you're still figuring things out, which I think is why I was successful pretty late in my career, because I knew at that point what the loose ends were and what the project looked like. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to answer more questions or elaborate on things in the Q&A, but I want to leave time for everyone else.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tim. That's really good insights to share with everyone. Thank you. We also have with us today another previous Olivia James Fellow, Amanda Ball. She received the fellowship in 2021, and she's a PhD candidate at UNC Chapel Hill, and also she's the current co-chair of the Student Affairs Interest Group. Amanda, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you did for your fellowship and any tips you'd like to share?
Yes, of course. So also thank you so much for having me today. It's really fun to promote the AIA Fellowships. As you said, I received my Olivia James for the 2021-2022 year. In contrast with Tim's experience, I got mine pretty early. I defended my dissertation proposal in June 2021 and arrived in Athens on September 1st. So for me, it was right as my project was taking shape and really allowed me to do a lot of data collection and site and museum visits that have really shaped my dissertation project as a whole and allowed me to progress a lot. The Olivia James was, I think, particularly valuable for me because I work in the Northeastern Aegean and I do sort of regional comparisons. I study the Northeast Aegean and Greek and Thracian interaction. So while on the Olivia James, I was mostly based in Athens and able to use the resources of the American School of Classical Studies. But I had the flexibility to travel up north quite often and to also travel to Bulgaria and to Romania during my year abroad. So the essence of the Olivia James being a traveling fellowship was hugely beneficial to me. I would, in terms of tips, I would definitely emphasize what Tim said. I actually got Tim's application and I found his example to be hugely helpful. So we had that connection there. I also am willing to share my application materials if anyone would like to see a successful example. I find borrowing phrasing from friends' grant applications, even across different kinds of grants, can be extremely helpful. Like Tim said, being very specific in your application makes it attractive. Choosing specific dates that you'll be in specific places is something that I think can really set your application apart. If you're like me, saying I will be here on October 2025 sounds very frightening, but if you can sort of get over that hesitation or anxiety around sort of pinning down a future date, it really makes you appear more composed and professional and sets you apart from people who would say, oh, I'd love to go here someday. What else did I want to say? I would say in my application process, something I've also found helpful, speaking of talking to people with other grant applications, connecting with your peers as well and finding people outside of archaeology to read your documents is hugely helpful, especially in terms of writing to a broad audience. And finally, I would say the AIA does have its committees online. I would never tell anyone to tailor their application for a specific committee member or anything like that. But sometimes going to look to see who will be reading your applications is something that is at very least a comfort. And at most, you can sort of familiarize yourself with their scholarship. But I'll wrap up there and happy to answer any questions in the question and answer section.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing all of that, Amanda. Sounds like you've done some very interesting work, and those are good insights to share too. All right, so in today's webinar, we'll do a quick overview of the fellowships that are offered by the AIA, break down the fellowship's application itself, and go into some detail about the project proposal in specific as well. We'll also have time for a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. And during that time, the panelists and I will all answer the questions that you've submitted in the Q&A feature. And just take a quick note that we might not be able to catch the questions that are put into the chat. So your question is much more likely to be answered if you use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And before we dive into fellowships, I want to take a brief moment to open up the floor for this webinar's co-sponsor, the AIA Student Affairs Interest Group. This is a great group that you all should consider joining. It's free and open to all AIA student members. And I'll let the interest group's co-chair, Amanda Ball, introduce it to you all.
Yeah, of course. So not only am I an Olivia James Fellow, I also am co-chair of the Student Affairs Interest Group with my co-chair, Tina Bacali Poyo. So the Student Affairs Interest Group is a group meant to advocate for students primarily at the AIA annual meetings, but we also have events outside of it. We plan this upcoming meeting to have a thing called Sage Advice, where Sage members will have pins on, people who are familiar with the conference. So first-time attendees can come ask questions about how to navigate the conference. Every year we have an AIA Sage panel that's really tailored towards elucidating the hidden curriculum, talking about topics very relevant to graduate students as their careers progress. So last year, we had a really interesting panel about navigating the job market. This year, we have one called Excavating Excavation, Uncovering Accessibility from Field School to Field Director, where we're going to talk about issues of finding a field school, getting excavation experience, funding excavations, etc. It'll be really exciting. Sage also runs the lightning talks at the AIA. So I encourage you all to apply for one of the lightning talks. It's a really fun event. And then usually in the spring after the AIA annual meeting, we have a dissertation talk where we invite someone to present their dissertation project as they near completion and defense. I had one more thing I wanted to say. I would say generally, if you want to email, follow us on Instagram. We'd love to hear if there are things you think Sage could be offering for graduate students involved in the AIA. And we do have an open meeting at the AIA annual meeting where we decide what topic we'll be presenting on at the following meeting, and we sort of have an open forum. So if you plan to attend the meeting, I encourage you to come in person. And if you do not plan to attend the meeting in person, I encourage you to reach out. We would love to hear from you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Amanda. We're very glad to have Sage's participation and support today. And again, we encourage you all to get involved if you're interested. And now onto the main focus of today's webinar. There we go. So as part of the AIA's mission to support and promote archaeological research and its dissemination, including the work of graduate students and emerging professionals, the AIA offers a variety of funding opportunities for scholastic research, fieldwork, and writing. Among these are 6 fellowships that fund research and associated travel for archaeology graduate students, emerging professionals, and recent PhDs who've completed their degree within the past 5 years. These fellowships can provide opportunities for fellows to strengthen their research skills, support themselves while traveling, and bolster their CVs. The AIA fellowships are the Anna C. and Oliver C. Colburn Fellowship. This fellowship is to support a student's study at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. Note that the applicant must not be an ASCSA member at the time of the application. That's an important thing to know. And also note too that this award used to be given out every other year, but this is changing to be awarded annually. So for this year only, there will be 2 awards for up to $8,500 apiece. And then beginning in 2025, there will be 1 award for this given out every year. Next, of the AIA's fellowships, we have the Harriet and Leon Pomerantz Fellowship. And this fellowship is to support a project that relates to Aegean Bronze Age archaeology. And this fellowship is for up to $6,000. Next, we go into our traveling fellowships. We start with the John R. Coleman Traveling Fellowship, which supports a fellow's travel and study in the Western Mediterranean or North Africa. Previous Coleman Fellows have traveled to countries such as Italy, Spain, Morocco, Egypt, among many other places throughout this fellowship's region for travel. And this fellowship has an award for up to $12,000. Next, we have our largest fellowship, the Olivia James Traveling Fellowship. This is intended for a fellow's travel and study in Greece, Cyprus, the Aegean Islands, Sicily, southern Italy, Asia Minor, and/or Mesopotamia. For this fellowship in particular, preference is given to projects that are proposed to be longer than 6 months. And there is one $26,000 award for this fellowship. One thing to note about the Olivia James in particular is that it is unique among the AIA fellowships in that fellows cannot hold any other major fellowship while in their tenure as Olivia James fellows. Conversely, the other fellowships do allow for you to cobble together multiple sources of funding, such as grants and scholarships and other fellowships, if necessary to complete your work. And next, we have the Archaeology of Portugal Fellowship, which, as the name suggests, is to support projects relating to the archaeology of Portugal. This fellowship is also open to Portuguese nationals, archaeologists, and archaeology students alike who wish to conduct research and study in the United States. Portuguese applicants who are applying for this type of support are not limited to the study of Portuguese archaeology, and funds can be used to research and study any archaeological region or topic while in the United States. And this award is for up to $7,000. And finally, we have the Helen M. Woodruff Fellowship of the AIA and the American Academy in Rome, which helps support a Rome Prize for the study of archaeology or classical studies. This award is offered through the American Academy in Rome, and applications are reviewed by the American Academy rather than the AIA Fellowships Committee. We will not be spending a lot of time on this fellowship today, so for more information about this fellowship, or if you have specific questions on that, please refer to the American Academy in Rome's website. All right, and one thing to note about all of the fellowships through the AIA is that applicants must be AIA members either at the professional level or the graduate level by the application deadline, which is November 1st for all of the fellowships. And now we will move on to the process of applying to the AIA's fellowships. And we'll start with a quick word about the applications themselves. So all fellowship applications are submitted online via a form that's linked on the AIA's website. Applicants are welcome to apply for any one or multiple fellowships that we offer. There is a separate form for the Archaeology of Portugal Fellowship, but the Colburn, Pomerantz, Coleman, and Olivia James fellowships all share a common application that's on our website. Quick note about that in particular, that if you want to apply to more than one of any of those fellowships on that common application, you will need to submit a new application for each fellowship you want to apply for, as it's likely that your responses will vary somewhat depending on the intent of the fellowship. Just select which fellowship your application is for each time you fill out the form, as you can see from the example here that's on my slide. And there are quite a few things that the Fellowships Committee asks applicants to submit for all of their applications. On the application form itself, you'll be asked for your project's title, an abstract about your project that's no more than 200 words in length, the title of your dissertation, if you're completing one or you have already completed one, a broader impact statement in which you describe how your project will further the discipline of archaeology and the impacts that it will have on your research area or to society in general, a 2 to 3 sentence social media friendly description of your project, copies of your transcripts, and for our purposes, unofficial transcripts are fine, 2 letters of reference from people who are familiar with you and your project. These letters of reference are confidential, and you'll be asked to waive your right to view them as part of your application. And the invitation to submit a letter electronically will automatically go out to your references' email addresses upon submitting your application. So please make sure that the email address is entered in correctly. Now, it is possible to send out a request for letters of recommendation before you turn in your application. This could be an especially good option if you plan to submit your application close to the November 1st deadline. This does require an additional step on your part, though. There is a link to the confidential letter form that's at the top of the application that you can send to your references, and they can complete the form in their own time. Just let them know that you're sending it on its way and of the deadlines that the AIA has in place. And you will also be asked to submit a copy of your CV that is up to date with any publications, other fellowships, or awards that you've received, your work experience and education, as well as any skills and abilities that will be useful to you throughout your research, such as language proficiency or software skills. Please be sure to also include your name and page numbers on each page of your CV too. And finally, one of the most important components of your application, and the one that makes candidates very nervous, is the project proposal. The next section of the presentation will dive deeper into this part of the application. So that is the overview of the application materials. Now I want to spend some time parsing through the fellowship's project proposal. So the proposal is arguably the most important part of your application for the committee. It is only 1,000 words in length, but there are some specific things that should be included within it. Broadly speaking, your proposal should define the research questions you're exploring, along with your goals for your project, the research methodologies that you'll be using, as well as the relationship between your goals and your methodology. Ultimately, the committee will consider your proposal based on both the feasibility of the project, and by that I mean, can it be completed in the time allotted? And do the resources for your project you intend to use actually exist, and are they accessible? And the committee will consider your proposal based on its proposed scholarly significance. It is key to present your project as something that is doable within the time parameters of the deadlines and not just a spectacular idea for advancing research in your field. It must be grounded in something that you can realistically complete. Now, these are the things that should go into your proposal. Firstly, you should address the major questions or issues that you will be looking into over the course of your research, a plan on what sort of work you will need to do to research those questions, including how much of the work you will be completed during the fellowship period. In your plan, you should also include a clear description of the materials to be studied, such as objects and collections, samples, texts, etc., as well as the methods you will use to study them, and a timetable on when each step on this plan will be completed. Similarly, you should also include an itinerary of the places that you will visit and the dates you will be there throughout your fellowship. These dates may be estimated as your specific plans may change slightly after the fellowship period begins, so October 2025, for example. Continuing on, you should also describe your own personal or academic qualifications as to why you are a good fit to investigate this topic. This could include things like language proficiency, previous coursework experience that will make you a good candidate to research these questions. To address on the feasibility of your project, you should also include the status of your access to the materials and sites you will be studying. This includes things like receiving permission from a host institution to examine collections, or seeking the necessary permits required by many countries to conduct fieldwork or study their materials. The committee wants to know essentially that you're taking the necessary steps to follow legal and ethical compliance with host institutions and countries as part of your research. And you should also include a selected bibliography, not to exceed 1 page in length, listing the most important and recent relevant scholarship in your field. And finally, your proposal should also include a justified budget that details all the expenses related to your project, along with a list of all the other financial resources available to you, such as grants or scholarships. And you should also mention in your budget too the amount of available funding that you're requesting from the AIA Fellowships Committee. For the budget, it's better to be more precise with your line items rather than estimate cost. So do a little preliminary research as to what you might expect to pay for things like airfare, room and board, etc. Please note too that there are a few unallowable expenses, and these are detailed on the fellowship's guidelines on our website. We won't be going into much detail on that today. And To wrap up the main portion of this presentation today, I wanted to share with you all some tips from the Fellowships Committee. The first is to be aware of page and word limits. A strong proposal can articulate the key elements of a project concisely, or within the general word counts and limits of the application. So don't get too lost in your writing. Also, remember that if you are applying to more than one fellowship, be sure that your proposal and application are tailored to the fellowship to which you are applying. Copy and pasting is fine, of course, for the application, but be careful that you don't include details that are irrelevant to one fellowship because they were copied over from a different application. Similarly, you will want to be sure that all the information that you've included in your proposal is accurate. And of course, this may seem a bit silly, but remember to proofread all of your application materials for errors before you submit too. Also consider how you are writing the proposal and the specific language that you're using, because the audience of the committee reading your proposal may not necessarily be experts in your specific field of study. So write accessibly for an academic audience who may be encountering your topic for the very first time. And finally, our last piece of advice to give you is that if you ever get stuck during the proposal writing process, take some time to reflect on why this project is so important to you, and consider what motivated you to dive deeper into researching this topic. Why did you want to apply for funding for this project in the first place? And let these reflections help you work through your writer's block or any other hiccups you face along the way. Thank you so much for listening to the main content portion of the webinar today. So we've come to the end of my part of the webinar, and we'll spend the rest of the session today, which is about 30 minutes or so, open for audience questions that my fellow panelists and I are happy to answer for you live today. Feel free to continue adding your questions into the Q&A box below, and we'll see how many we can get through in the time that remains. Meredith, are there any that you would like us to start with first?
Sure, and I think this is when a lot of our panelists can speak to, and is something that a lot of people have questions about. But any tips for the budgets? Are there resources out there to help with estimations of cost of living, etc., to make it seem reasonable? Yeah, what tips do you guys have for putting together the budgets specifically?
So when I was designing my budget for the Olivia James, first I designed my kind of schedule where I thought I would be during different parts of the year. And then I just went on Airbnb and looked up like apartments that I would rent for that time. And I just added each of those line items with like the very specific amount that Airbnb said, like the reasonable apartment that I identified would cost. I did look up per diems in different countries to sort of think about what your food costs might be. And I did look at different flights and how much they cost at the time that I was writing my application. And I think you can sort of put in the amount that a flight costs in October 2023, September 2023, and then put a note of like all these costs are estimates based off of what I'm seeing at the time I'm writing this application.
I would just add that and Amanda was probably meant when she looked up the per diems, you can go to the State Department, the US State Department, and look up any country, and it tells you what the State Department expects civil servants essentially to be able to cost on a budget or use, both for hotels, for instance, and also for per diem for food and other expenses. So that's a good place to start. My experience has been that in fact, for a place like Greece, those estimates are actually quite generous for what the actual costs tend to be when you're in the country. But no one's going to say, oh, well, this is too much if the State Department, And I would say that also for budgets, it's good to not only when you're costing something, when that estimate is made. If you're looking at prices in euros, be sure to say what the exchange rate was to the dollar when you were creating your budget in dollars, right? So you're seeing what costs are in euros, translating that into dollars. Let us know. That can be super flexible. You know, it changes a lot. There was a last thing. Oh, and you can quote your source, right? So that if you're getting this information from the State Department, you can quote that. If you're getting it from Airbnb, you can quote, you know, you can cite as a link or just even a source where you're getting your financial information from, because that then really grounds it in something that we all consult that's real, and it's feels very solid when we're looking at a budget.
Yeah, that all seems, I mean, I agree with everything. The only other thing I could think of is, at least when I was in Greece, it was important that I be a visiting associate member of the American School of Classical Studies, because they help you with your permits, at least in Greece. And so I budgeted that in as well. Just I don't know if Amanda mentioned that, but yeah.
I guess one final thing I would add is if there's any equipment you need to get to conduct your research, I would add those as line items. So if you need a nicer camera to document your site visits, or to take photos of objects in museums and stuff like that, definitely make that a line item. If there's software that you need to get, make that a line item. So try to think about what you need to conduct the research that you're proposing.
And you might even, you know, not even just the equipment, but think about tax and shipping, and are you going to have to pay extra to bring it over on a plane, or, you know, things like that too, can all go in there. Awesome. Well, I think those are some great budget tips. We have another question that I might have to let Amanda and Tim off the hook on, but what were the broader impacts that you two claimed for your projects? That's part of it now. I think that was actually added to the application this year. So I don't think Tim and Amanda actually wrote that. That's something that the NSF asks in their grant applications. I think they ask for a much longer response than we're looking for in the application. There are some guidelines about how long to make it. But essentially, you can, if you Google broader impact statements, a lot of universities actually have a ton of resources on this to figure out for NSF. But I think at the very heart of it, you're looking at benefits and outcomes and not logistics for the broader impact statement. And yeah, I don't know if any of you have any experience with that and want to add something to that.
I definitely framed my proposal. I mean, I think it's always important to talk about how your project will impact not just your field, but could potentially ripple outside of it. So my dissertation that I was working on for the Olivia James looked at immigrant communities in archaic and classical Athens through their tombstones, to think about how they were incorporated into cemeteries. So I think I actually start my proposal with a quote from that Barack Obama gave at the end of his second term. He visited Greece and kind of gave this windy speech about, not windy, but, you know, a flowery speech about it as the birthplace of democracy. And then and how there was equality for citizens. But I, you know, went from there to, but how did it treat its immigrant communities in the past? And it's really important, not just in antiquity, but today, to think about how who's allowed to be visible, who's incorporated, who's not, I mean, it felt during during Trump's presidency too, like a very important thing to think about at the time. But for all of your projects, I'm sure that you can think about ways in which the takeaways from your project could have rippling effects, not just in the field, but outside of it as well. I'm sure you can. Anyway, I wrote about it a little bit, but I wasn't asked to, I guess.
Yeah, I would say, so I wasn't asked to submit a broader impact statement, but something I definitely emphasized in my research proposal as a kind of zoom out impact of conducting the project was thinking about how modern political borders can define the production of archaeological knowledge, and how important it is to do regional transborder research. And I really emphasized how understudied the region that I concentrate on is, how much wonderful work there is being done by the local archaeologists, but how little work there has been to sort of stitch together that work. So I put it in context of the regional scholarship, as well as this kind of broader level, like what Tim was talking about, thinking about themes relevant to today.
Yeah, and I would just add one further thing that both of those hit on that. But if you want to think about public outreach, that many of you might be working with, say, material that's been languishing, what we call legacy material, languishing in a collection. And, you think, well, what is the broader impact on that? But bringing those things out into the surface and exposing, them to a public who might never see them, that's the kind of thing too that is a huge broad impact and part of AIA's mission, in fact, for public education and outreach.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that's something that AIA had in their grants applications in the last couple of years, and it was really helpful for both evaluation and also after the fact, just up for us to tell the stories of all of the fellows and grant winners, and so that I got added into the fellowships application this year. So it's a chance for you to really think about that discreetly. And we have one more question, and if you guys have any more questions, feel free to pepper them into the Q&A box. But any advice as to how to balance fellowship research and graduate courses? Like, is it best to do the fellowship research in the summer and then resume courses during the fall and spring semesters? Do you guys want to add some insights on that?
I did all. Well, that's not true. I traveled in the summers when I was still in coursework. I did not. I don't know that I was allowed to just postpone or delay coursework at Duke. I didn't even ask, but I don't think that I would have been allowed to. And for us, at least, we didn't reach the kind of deep research phase until coursework was over, and we were in the kind of dissertation phase of graduate school. I did do some summer traveling and research in the summers though, so if you have one of the fellowships that lets you do that, I would get with someone who does research in the region that you work in to ask for advice on how to get access to that material. That might not be something you're used to or have experience with in the coursework phase of grad school. And that's something that you might have to prompt a mentor or someone in your mentor network to actually give you advice on. It's one of those, the hidden curriculum is, how do you get permission to study things in museums or in collections? I mean, Amanda, I know, has a lot of experience with that as well. So yeah, I think that would be a piece of advice that I would have is make sure you know how to see material in collections and museums if you are planning fellowship research for a summer, but while you're still in coursework.
Yeah, I think I would add, so my experience was that we really couldn't get into our dissertation research until we had completed our coursework. So at UNC, you usually finish coursework at the end of the fall semester of your fourth year, and then you want to aim to defend your prospectus by the end of that spring. So in every summer, I would say most archaeologists are expected to be participating in an excavation. So finding an excavation that is broadly in line with the kind of research you want to do, so that you're in roughly the right area, and starting to build a professional network is really important from very early in your graduate student career. Because like Tim is saying, creating those connections can hugely benefit you for when you do get to the point where you want to be working on your dissertation. And then in terms of doing research, I think in the field and in the library are two different animals. If you can tailor your courses and your course papers and research projects to be beneficial to your eventual dissertation, that's a great way to sort of prepare yourself for success. So in that way, you get in the library time and you get in that research time early. For the field work, it just kind of ties back to what I was saying. Try to attach yourself to excavation projects in line with your goals for your dissertation and your research career more broadly, so that you can use those summers, if you're excavating in the summers, to travel from the site that you're excavating from, so you're already kind of in the right region. That would be my advice.
Okay, we do have another kind of timing question, I guess. Can a recently graduated undergrad student apply to any of the fellowships offered by the AIA? Kim, I don't know if you have experience with this one, but you do have to read each individual fellowship has some different stipulations about who is eligible to apply. Some of them are specifically for so Coleman is specifically for dissertation research, so that one is, wouldn't and then there are ones like Olivia James where it says preference will be given to individuals engaged in dissertation research. So most of these fellowships are tend to be targeting ABD students, I think, but some of them it is the word preference. So I think, I wouldn't say you're not eligible, but you might be at a disadvantage against someone that's ABD and applying to do dissertation work. Kim, do you remember seeing people earlier in their careers applying for fellowships when you were on the committee?
I think only for the Colburn, who were applying to go to the American school. But a lot of that is, most folks are going to the American school either for an irregular year or for work as an associate member later in their graduate school careers, rather than immediately at the start, post undergrad work. I know some that have in between the two, but I think most of our applicants are further along in the graduate phase. And I would say that a lot of the ones that say preference for those working on a dissertation, it actually means the other ones are postdocs who are also applying for that same kind of research. So it's more on the even further alongside rather than the precursor to that stage.
Okay. And then this one I have never seen, so I don't know that I have an answer on this one, but are you allowed to apply twice to a single fellowship with two different projects? I mean, you can apply for multiple fellowships. I don't think I've ever seen anyone apply for the same.
I would say I mean, I don't think there's anything that says that you cannot, but one of the things I think that would be odd is, how are you able to split your main research focus into two different projects? Like that would be a legitimate question, because we're looking for folks who are really, really focused on a particular set, or a single research agenda. So having two diverse enough projects that you would be able to apply to the same thing twice, I think we would worry about, well, what is going to be the focus on any one of those? Is it enough to actually sustain the work and get it to the level necessary?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call. It might just sort of be a red flag to the committee. You haven't decided which path you're going down yet, or the lack of focus.
Yeah, and very different from the idea that you can apply for the same project to more than one fellowship. Because I wanted to point out, of course, because the Olivia James is a much larger scope, much larger award, that there's no reason not to also apply to one of the ones that is a smaller scope and a smaller award, because you could do both, but be aware that you're going to want to tailor what you're applying for and be very specific about, if awarded the one that's 7,000, right? What portion are you going to do with that, rather than just saying, I'm doing the Olivia James amount of work, but only for the smaller scope or the smaller amount. So that's a place where you definitely, please do apply to both, but think about how you're going to make that time and that money work based on what you might be awarded. And everyone's budgets are going to be more than what we offer, right? That's just reality. So it does not hurt to give your project budget and then say, when awarded the Olivia James, I will do these things in this timeline as part of it. But, obviously knowing that everyone's budgets, and especially if you're applying to one of the smaller ones, the budget's going to be bigger, and that's okay.
Great. All right, and then there's a question kind of alluding to the fact that this is a stressful process, and it is a difficult thing. Anything that makes it more fun? Any tips about how to make it more fun or manageable or anything like that? Did you guys join support groups for people applying for fellowships and grants, or?
I personally don't know that I can make the process suck less or more be more fun, but I think shift in perspective that might be useful, and at least let you endure it more. I don't know, with a better attitude potentially, is that the time you spent writing fellowships is never wasted. That, like what I talked about in writing the project proposal, and I'm sure that this is true for Amanda and Kim, that when you write a grant proposal for an outside audience, it forces you to sit back and actually think about the full scope of your project. Is it feasible? Is it what are some things that you can do to improve it? Like, it's all of those are really good things to be forced to stop and do, and will immediately kind of help you write the introduction and conclusions to your dissertations or book or whatever, an article, whatever the proposal's related to. And then your dissertation these funding applications, if it's for dissertation research, turn into the first draft of your funding applications for like young career fellowships. So like I used my Olivia James application as the basis for my Center for Hellenic Studies application, and I was a fellow last year, and it allowed me to have leave and actually get a lot of work done. And you just never know, like it can feel so futile and like buying a lottery ticket, but it's so much more than that, because it's writing that is good for you to do, whether it's just going directly into a dissertation, or at least changing your thinking, or actually becoming something you use for years to come.
So I would say a few things in addition to what Tim said, which I think is hugely valuable. I return a lot to applications that were unsuccessful, just to borrow language, because even the process of working on unsuccessful applications is really helpful. I would say when you're building these budgets, when you're kind of visualizing your year, thinking about being in those places and thinking about the kind of fun you're going to have if you like get to do it is very motivating when you're working on it. So if the actual sitting down and working on it isn't feeling so fun, if it feels really stressful, going on Instagram and like looking up like cafes in Athens or something can make it more fun and make it so that you start to like think about what your life would look like wherever you're applying to go. I did kind of have a support group. I was very lucky in that the graduate students in my program are hugely supportive, and I'm really grateful to them. And if you don't have a lot of people who are in the same phase as you in your program, I think putting out a call to friends who you know might be in a similar position and sort of saying, hey, can we just do check-ins, or sort of even just have like a group chat where you're sending memes of like, this is terrible, this sucks, like I'm gonna go live in the woods. Like that's very motivating, just to know that no one is out there being like, I'm churning these out, no problem, and I'm having the best time. Like nobody's like that. So it's good to sort of, especially talk to people who you really admire and hear them sort of struggling with it as well. It's hugely helpful. And then the advice my friend gave me this past summer, which I'm trying really hard to remember, is like, once you hit submit, try to forget about it. Like having the date that you're supposed to hear by up on a calendar. I did this last year and it ended up kind of driving me crazy. So I would say don't do that. Don't have like a date that you're supposed to know by in sight. I think that can cause you to sort of fixate and like add to the anxiety. Try to forget what you've applied for once you've applied. Put in the best application you can and then put it out of your mind. So it's not a fun process. I'm so sorry. I'm going through it as well. And as Dr. Shelton was saying, we're all going to go through this forever and ever. Amen. So just trying to figure out how to get through and make it as enjoyable as it can be is the best strategy.
And I'm just going to add that at the end of the day, think about it this way. You have worked all this time to be able to write a dissertation on something that you want to do and that you're passionate about. Try to embrace that passion, because that's going to come through in your writing. And that's really attractive to read as well, when you can feel the passion for their project. So, latch onto that, grab onto that passion.
Does anyone want to throw out their average amount of time you spent on each application submitted, or do you think that varies a lot?
The first one take, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that it varies a lot. I try to start working on it a month before the due date because I like to take breaks from it. So I like to start a month, get a rough draft, step away for a while, come back, edit, step away for a while, come back, edit. And the really important thing to keep in mind is you need to let your letter writers know at least 2 weeks before the deadline. You need to ask for the letters at least 2 weeks before the deadline, and you want to show them your application. So you need to have at least a rough draft 2 weeks before the deadline. So building out from that, start at least 3 weeks before the deadline. So you have a draft at least 2 weeks before the deadline so that everything can come together. Tim, do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, no, I was just going to say the first one takes forever, or seemingly forever. And then every subsequent one becomes much easier as you kind of refine what you're saying. Days, I mean, I think I wrote my successful Olivia James application like on the bus as a regular member at the American School. So like, I don't know. I nickeled and dimed that one in terms of time, but they can take, hour-long chunks over weeks to kind of think through, but yeah, they get easier over time.
Sounds like you both kind of spaced out working on them instead of doing it all in one go, which is, I think, helpful to know. We have time for one final question, and it is it is not one I have a full answer to. But somebody pointed out one of the requirements for the Coleman, and this is true for all of the fellowships, is that you need to have been an AIA member for a year prior to your application. And that for, some people may not have that at this point. And they want to know if this is a strict requirement. We're actually reviewing that requirement right now. Kim and I were exchanging emails about it last week. It's actually going to go up to a vote to our governing body early in October. So we will have a better answer for that in about 2 weeks. But I think either way, assume that there is a membership requirement, and that the 1 year requirement might potentially be lifted, hopefully. So.
Yeah, great. In that case, thank you all for posing your questions to our panelists today. And also thank you for joining us all today. It's been great learning more about fellowships and getting to pick the brains of our past fellows. I hope this was all helpful to you, and whether you're considering to applying for a fellowship at the Archaeological Institute of America. If more questions come up in the next few weeks or months, please feel free to reach out to us at fellowships@archaeological.org, and we're all more than happy to help. Thank you to Kim, Tim, Amanda, and Meredith for all joining us today, and to the Student Affairs and Interest Group for co-sponsoring today's webinar. That's all we have for you all. Take good care, everybody.